No empire was ever brought down by the thing it feared. It was brought down by the thing it wanted. You were raised to believe pleasure is the reward, the trophy at the top of the climb. Comfort, abundance, the soft landing. Earn enough, and one day you get to stop. That's what all of it was for. It's the most expensive lie a man can swallow. The people who actually understand power have always known something colder. You don't break a strong man by taking things from him. You break him by giving him everything he wants. You don't fight the lion. You feed it until it forgets it was ever a lion at all. There's a name for what happens to a man drowned in his pleasures. By the end, you'll recognize it. And there's a good chance you're already living in it. The winter that beat Hannibal. In the spring of 215 BC, an army walked out of a city and could no longer remember how to be feared. 6 months earlier, that same army had done the impossible. At a place called Cannae, Hannibal of Carthage had surrounded and annihilated the largest force Rome had ever assembled. Tens of thousands of legionaries dead in a single afternoon of butchery, so total that historians still argue about how the encirclement physics even worked. Rome was on its knees. The road to the city was open. Hannibal's men were the most lethal fighting machine in the ancient world, hardened by years of marching, by crossing the Alps with elephants, by sleeping in mud and freezing rain, and winning anyway. Then they were welcomed into Capua, the second richest city in Italy. Warm baths, soft beds, wine that never ran out, women, perfume, food, ease. Everything a soldier dreams about in the cold. The city threw open its gates and offered the conquerors a winter of pure indulgence. And according to Livy, that winter did what Rome's legions could not. The army that left Capua in spring was a different animal. The men who had become entangled in comfort kept slipping back to it. The moment they had to sleep in tents again, the moment the marching and the toil returned, their strength and their spirit gave out. Livy wrote that they collapsed like raw recruits who'd never seen a battlefield. Desertions climbed. The edge was gone. The proverb that survives from the period says it plainly. Capua was Hannibal's Cannae. The thing that destroyed his army wasn't a sword. It was a feather bed. Historians debate how literally to take this. Hannibal fought on for years afterward, but the ancients didn't keep retelling that story for 1,000 years because they were confused. They told it because they'd watched it happen over and over to men far stronger than themselves. The pattern is this: hardship doesn't weaken men. Hardship is the only thing that ever made them strong. And comfort, the reward, the prize, the soft landing you've been promised, is the most efficient weapon ever invented for unmaking a dangerous man without lifting a blade. Which raises a question the self-help shelf will never ask out loud. If comfort is doing that to you, why does it feel so good while it's happening? The answer is sitting in your skull right now, and it has a chemical name. The bill always comes due. Most people misunderstand dopamine. They think it's the pleasure chemical, the little flood of joy when something good happens. It isn't. Dopamine is the molecule of wanting, of anticipation, of the lean-forward hunger right before the thing arrives. It evolved to make a creature chase food, chase a mate, chase the next ridge over. And it fires hardest not when you get the reward, but when you're reaching for it. Dopamine is the engine of pursuit. It is, in a very real sense, the chemical signature of a man on a mission. Here's what nobody tells you about that engine. It runs on a balance. The psychiatrist Anna Lemke describes the brain's reward system as a kind of internal seesaw, with pleasure on one side and pain on the other. Tip it hard toward pleasure, and the brain, which cares about one thing above all, equilibrium, does not simply enjoy the ride. It pushes back. It floods the other side with discomfort to level the scale. This is an old, well-documented principle in neuroscience called the opponent process mechanism, and it has a brutal feature. The brain doesn't stop pushing when the scale hits even. It overshoots. It tips you past neutral into deficit. You feel that overshoot every single day, and you've been blaming it on the wrong things. The flatness after the binge, the hollow after the orgasm, the Sunday evening dread after a weekend of nothing but ease. That low, gray, irritable nothing that follows every cheap high. That isn't a separate problem from the pleasure. It is the bill for the pleasure. Same transaction, delayed invoice. And when you keep tipping the seesaw, porn, sugar, the endless thumb scroll, the dozen small dopamine hits before you've even left the bed in the morning, the brain stops bothering to reset. It down-regulates. It withdraws its own receptors. It becomes deaf to its own chemistry. Brain imaging from researchers like Nora Volkow shows the dopamine signaling in heavily addicted brains running below baseline, not high, weeks into abstinence. The person who chased pleasure relentlessly doesn't end up euphoric. He ends up unable to feel much of anything. There's a clinical word for it: anhedonia, the inability to take pleasure in things that should be pleasurable. The man living in a dopamine deficit needs the stimulation now not to feel good, just to feel normal, to climb back up to the flat line everyone else stands on for free. Sit with the cruelty of that for a second. The reward system that was built to make you hunt has been hijacked into making you graze. And a grazing animal does not conquer anything. It just keeps its head down, chewing, until something with sharper teeth wanders by. This is the first mechanism, and it's the gentlest one, because the next thing pleasure does to a man isn't just dull his drive. It rewires what he's even capable of wanting, the appetite that eats itself. In 1956, a researcher named Frank Beach gave a name to one of the strangest patterns in biology, and he named it, with a straight face, after a U.S. president. The setup is simple, and it's been replicated across nearly every species ever tested. Put a male rat in a cage with a female. He mates again. Eventually, he's spent, done, exhausted, sexually finished, completely uninterested. By every measure, his drive is gone. Now introduce a new female. He's instantly, fully restarted. Not rested, restarted. The exhaustion evaporates. The drive comes roaring back, sometimes stronger than the first time. They call it the Coolidge effect. And inside the brain, it's not subtle. Dopamine in the reward center collapses as the male satiates with the familiar, and then spikes violently the moment novelty walks in. It's been documented in rats, bulls, rams, birds, even in snails. The drive was never about the act, it was about the new. Now hold that fact next to the device in your pocket. For all of human history, novelty was rare and it was earned. A new partner, a new hunt, a new territory. These cost something. They were the prizes at the end of real effort. Your reward circuitry was calibrated for a world where the new arrived a few times a year, if you fought for it. Then we built an infinite novelty machine and handed it to every man on earth for free. An endless scroll of new faces, new bodies, new stimulation. Each one a fresh spike. Each spike teaching the system that the next swipe might be better than the one in front of you. Researchers studying compulsive pornography use describe exactly this. Not a craving for more of the same, like a normal addiction, but a relentless escalation toward the more novel, the more extreme, just to reach the arousal an ordinary image used to deliver. The appetite doesn't get satisfied. It gets trained to need more than reality can ever supply. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. A man who feeds this engine isn't just wasting time. He's recalibrating his entire wanting system around a stimulus no real woman, no real achievement, no real life can compete with. He sits across from someone who actually loves him and feels a low static of boredom he can't explain. He achieves the goal and it tastes like cardboard because his baseline for exciting has been jacked up past anything the physical world can match. He has trained himself to be bored by his own life. And here's the quiet horror of it. He doesn't experience this as weakness. He experiences it as the world being gray. He thinks the problem is out there, that the job is dull, the woman is dull, the city is dull. Everything is just somehow less than it should be. He'll spend years looking for the external thing that will finally make him feel alive again, never once suspecting that he burned out the part of himself that was supposed to do the feeling. So far, I've described this like it's an accident, a side effect of modern abundance, something that just happens to men in a world too rich for the brains they were issued. It's time to stop being polite about that, because for most of history, this was not an accident. It was a method. The quietest weapon ever made. Go back for a moment to the oldest game of power there is. How do you neutralize a rival you cannot defeat by force? You can't always kill a dangerous man. Killing creates martyrs, sparks revolts, invites revenge from his sons. The cruder rulers tried it and spent their reigns putting out fires. The cunning ones found something better. They learned you could disarm a dangerous man completely, permanently, and gratefully by drowning him in pleasure. It's one of the oldest plays there is, and it's almost never written down, because the genius of it is that the target thanks you while it happens. You take the rival prince, the ambitious heir, and you do not imprison him. You give him a palace. You give him concubines, feasts, wine, hunting grounds, every indulgence a man could name. You make his life so soft, so saturated, so endlessly comfortable that the hunger that made him dangerous quietly dissolves. The man who would have raised an army is now choosing between desserts. He is no longer a threat to anyone, least of all the person who defanged him, and he will defend his own cage because it is upholstered. Conquered kings were pensioned into luxury, precisely so they'd lose the will to reconquer. Every durable empire understood that a gilded life is a more reliable prison than an iron one, because the prisoner stops wanting to leave. Now look at what's been built around you. I'm not going to insult you with a conspiracy theory. No one in a control room is plotting your specific softening. It's worse than that, and stranger. The same mechanism has been industrialized, automated, and pointed at every man at once, not by a tyrant, but by an economy that discovered the single most profitable thing it can do is keep you tipping that seesaw toward pleasure forever. Every frictionless app, every feed engineered to never end, every flavor optimized in a lab to override the off switch your body was born with, every form of stimulation delivered faster and more potently than ever before. All of it converging on one outcome, whether anyone intends it or not. A population of men with the reward circuitry of conquered princes, defending the very thing that hollowed them out. Certain they're free because no one's holding a sword. The old emperors had to capture you first. Now you walk into the palace yourself and lock the door from the inside. That's the reframe. Pleasure isn't the reward at the end of the war. For most of history, it's been the war. The actual instrument of defeat, the thing handed to the men too dangerous to kill. And the question stops being whether the world is doing this to you and becomes something much harder to look at. How much of it are you doing to yourself, for free, every single day, on purpose? The men who saw this coming wrote it down 2,000 years ago. We tend to ignore them because they were not fun at parties. Seneca and the soft-bodied. Seneca was the richest philosopher in Rome, advisor to an emperor, a man who could have indulged in anything the ancient world produced, which is exactly why his warning lands harder than a monk's. He wasn't abstaining out of ignorance. He was surrounded by pleasure, watching what it did. In his letters, Seneca drew a line that modern men have completely erased. He separated pleasure, voluptas, the cheap, restless, external buzz, from joy, gaudium, the deep, stable, internal kind that comes from living rightly and owes nothing to circumstance. Pleasure, he warned, when it isn't kept on a leash, doesn't lead to more pleasure. It rushes headlong into its opposite. The pursuit of it ends in sorrow. He understood the seesaw 2 millennia before anyone could scan a brain. But his sharpest observation was about the body. Seneca watched the wealthy of Rome pamper themselves into helplessness. Heated floors, exotic foods, the body cushioned from every discomfort. And he noticed something. The more you protect a man from hardship, the smaller the hardship needs to be to destroy him. Comfort doesn't fortify, it thins the walls. A man who has never been cold is broken by a draft. A man who has never been hungry panics at a delayed meal. A man who has arranged his life so he never has to feel discomfort has, without realizing it, handed the controls of his nervous system to anyone willing to threaten his comfort. That isn't a character flaw. That's a description of how a man gets controlled. The man who cannot tolerate discomfort is already owned. He folds under the smallest pressure because the threat of losing his ease makes him cave every time. His boss knows it. His addictions know it. Anyone who can take away his next hit of comfort holds a leash he can't see. You cannot bargain hard, walk away, or hold a line if you're incapable of sitting in the discomfort that comes with all three. Your softness is a map of where to push. The Stoics weren't recommending suffering because they were grim. They were recommending it because a man who has voluntarily made friends with hardship is the one man in the room who can't be controlled by it. But there's a state below the soft man, a final stage of the disease, where a man stops being controllable and becomes something else entirely. Something that doesn't even register that anything is wrong. A philosopher with a hammer saw him coming 140 years ago, and he was terrified. The man who blinks. Friedrich Nietzsche feared one creature above all others. Not the tyrant, not the criminal, not the nihilist. He feared the man who is perfectly comfortable. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he sketched a figure he called the last man, and he meant it as the most damning thing he could imagine a human becoming. The last man is the end product of a civilization that has made comfort its highest value. He has his little pleasure for the day and his little pleasure for the night. He's eliminated risk, hardship, and danger from his life. He's warm, he's fed, he's entertained, he's safe. He has, as Nietzsche put it, invented happiness. And then the line that should chill you. And he blinks. He blinks. A small, contented animal blink. No fire in the eyes. No longing. Nietzsche said the last man can no longer give birth to a dancing star, meaning he no longer carries enough inner chaos, enough hunger and tension and unmet desire to create anything, become anything, or aim at anything beyond his own comfort. And here is the detail that makes the last man the most disturbing figure in philosophy. He is not suffering. The tragic hero suffers. The villain suffers. The last man feels fine. He's content. If you told him he'd been hollowed out, he would look at you puzzled and reach for his snack. He doesn't experience his own diminishment as loss, because the very faculty that would let him feel the loss, the longing, the divine discontent, the drive to overcome, is the exact thing comfort dissolved first. You cannot grieve a hunger you no longer have. This is why too much pleasure is so much more dangerous than pain. Pain announces itself. Pain is a fire alarm. It makes you move. Pleasure works in total silence and convinces you nothing is wrong. The man being destroyed by hardship knows he's in a fight. The man being destroyed by comfort thinks he's winning. That low-grade contentment you've maybe felt, the sense that things are basically fine, that you're comfortable enough, that the dreams you had at 19 were probably unrealistic anyway, and it's mature to let them go. Examine it. Make sure it's peace, because it wears the exact same face as surrender. And from the inside, the two feel almost identical. Nietzsche saw the species sleepwalking toward the last man. Jung saw the same collapse, but he saw it happening inside one specific kind of soul, and he gave it a name that fits half the men you know. The boy who never lands. Carl Jung wrote about an archetype the Romans called the puer aeternus, the eternal boy, the man who refuses at some deep level to ever fully grow up. You know him. You might be him. The eternal boy is often charming, gifted, full of potential. That's the tragedy of him. He's always about to do the great thing, the novel he'll write, the business he'll start, the body he'll build, the woman he'll commit to, the life he'll finally get serious about. But he lives in what Jung's student, Marie-Louise von Franz, called the provisional life, always one step removed from real commitment, keeping every door open, refusing to plant his feet in any single hard reality. Because to commit to one thing is to kill the fantasy of all the others. And what keeps the eternal boy airborne decade after decade? What lets a man stay in the provisional life until his hair goes gray? Pleasure. The constant, low-grade availability of comfort and stimulation that takes just enough edge off the dissatisfaction.